All right, so I apologize. It's a little bit late start today. I was over in the 3D printer trying to get that working and whatever, and got sidetracked, and I apologize for that. Today we're going to start on exercise 119, which is a continuation of what you did last class with your floor plan. The difference is today we're going to start thinking about how do you make that floor plan readable. And so thus far you drew on one layer. You had the topography layer and you had layer 0. You drew your floor plan with all of its lines on layer 0, and we're going to try to modify that such that we get some reasonable line weights, reasonable depth to the drawing, and really be able to understand what is wall, what is door, etc. Next class, I'll do a lecture before we start our elevations all about line weights and talking about the importance of line weights and that sort of thing. So today, I'm not going to tell you specifics about why certain lines are certain thicknesses, but as we start to get things set up, if you flip your page over today, and I pulled up the little graphic of it, it's a little blurry on the screen. I gave you a line weight guide that will help you determine what appropriate line weights are for certain things. And so I did this as a way of kind of helping you out. It's the same little floor plan that we did in that very first exercise. Yours is obviously going to be more complicated and look a little bit different than this one. But this is just a way of giving you kind of a general idea of how these work and what their line weights would be. So first thing is I went ahead and I opened up AutoCAD. And this is the floor plan that I'm going to work with going forward. It's a little different than the one I started with last class, but this one's fairly well resolved, and it's the floor plan that I've been using for the last couple semesters. So it has a good level of complexity to it. I have a kitchen space that's open to the living space. We could argue that the dining space is shared in here. Short little hallway, bathroom off the hallway, 2 bedrooms, and an outside courtyard. This is by no means magic. It's just this is the floor plan that I came up with, and so this is what I was drawing. There's a few little overhangs and some interesting stuff going on that you'll see when we get into the more 3D realm, or at least when we do the elevations. But today it's about trying to understand how do I make this particular floor plan more readable. And we're going to start by thinking about this in terms of general broad categories of objects. And this is what typically happens in a firm. Though they assign line weights a little bit differently, and I'll explain that as we go forward. Typically, on an AutoCAD drawing, there are several different groups of people that would touch a file. The number one person would be the architect itself. And so layers relating to the architect generally start with an A dash. So things like walls would be on an A dash wall layer. If the architect's done and passes the drawings off to, say, an engineer, depending on the engineer, whether it's a structural engineer or a civil engineer, their drawings typically, or their layers would typically begin with C dash for a civil or S dash for a structural. If you were doing a mechanical engineer, it would be M. So we try to designate layers based on who's working within that context. For our purposes today, it doesn't really matter what you name the layers because you're the only person that's going to work on the drawing. You're not going to hand off your AutoCAD files to someone else. So given that scenario, it doesn't really matter what we call our layers. I'm going to suggest that you name your layers kind of in a similarly conventional manner. So first thing we're going to do is open up our layer properties. So at the ribbon at the top, in that home ribbon, there's a big button for layer properties, kind of right smack in the center of everything. And if I click on that layer properties window, it's going to bring up this little floating layer properties manager right here. And in here, we currently have layer 0, and we have a layer for topography. Those are the only 2 layers we have. We're going to need to create some layers for our drawing. And so I'm going to click on the new layer icon, which is a bunch of stacks of paper here, three pieces of paper stacked with a yellow and orange star on it. And I'll click on that new layer. And it's going to create a new layer called layer 1. I'm going to rename this layer 1 to be A-walls, or A-wall, either way. This is then representative of the things that are walls in my drawing. So I'm going to put things related to walls on that particular layer. I'll create another layer, and I'll call this one A-door, for example. I might create another layer, and that other layer might be called A-wall. Did it not create my wall layer? There it is. There we go. A-window. There's usually a few others that I tend to use, and sometimes you create these as you go because you realize, oh, I need a layer for this. The other one that I tend to use is A-fixtures. But we'll get to that. If I was doing an electrical plan as the architect, I would have A-electrical. If I was doing, trying to think of what else, there might be an A-overhead for things that are above, and I'll show you that one in just a second as well. So on our layer properties here, we have each of those layers identified. And then as we come across on each layer, let's look at the wall layer, for example. There's a light bulb and then a sun, and then a little padlock symbol and a printer. Those are the first four icons that we see. The light bulb and the sun are two different ways of turning off your layers. So content that is on that layer, if you don't want to see it, you can click on either of those, and it will make the content disappear temporarily. So this shouldn't be a surprise. It's like clicking on the eyeball in Photoshop. It makes things go away. Where people get confused is, why are there two? What's the difference? And there is a difference. This difference is a holdover from back when AutoCAD was first running on computers, and it was really complicated and really hard on the computer to run AutoCAD. In our world now, computers are so fast and so powerful that running AutoCAD is not a big feat for them. And so we don't really care which one of these you use. The difference here is whether the geometry stays in the computer's memory when you turn the layer off. So if you just turn, using the light bulb, if you turn the layer on or off, the geometry stays within the computer's memory. If you freeze and thaw the layer, which is the sun icon, if you freeze the layer, it removes it from the system's memory while you're working. It makes no difference in this day and age which one you choose, because computers are powerful enough to keep the content in the memory. It's only a line drawing. It's not a big deal. So, but I like to tell you why they're at least there. So I grew up in AutoCAD a long, long time ago. I figured it out. I think I've been working in AutoCAD for more than 20 years. So it's kind of scary when you think of it in that context. Some of you are like not 20 years old. That's really scary. So in this particular context, for me, I learned to freeze and thaw layers because it was good on a computer. I mean, we're talking like Pentium 2, like, you know, the hard drive size was like 200 megabytes or something. Like it was like old school computing. Anyway, so it made a difference. So I tend to freeze and thaw my layers because that was how you used to have to do it because you didn't want to crash the computer. You guys don't have to worry about it. Either one's fine. And they're there. The padlock locks a layer and unlocks a layer, so you can't accidentally do something to a layer if the padlock is on. It's just locked. You can't delete it or do anything to it. The printer icon controls printing. So if you want the layer to print or to not print, that turns it on and turns it off when you go to print. This is really, really useful down the road, because sometimes you'll want to have, and I'll actually show you a scenario today where you want to have some lines on a layer that doesn't end up printing. And so that can be useful. We'll come back to that. Next thing is color. And so like I said when we first started AutoCAD, because AutoCAD works on a black background, the color white, which is what all of these layers are right now, when you go to print gets flipped to black. All the rest of the colors display as they would when they print. So it's a little tricky if you use a gray, for example, because a dark gray is really hard to see in the workspace here, in the model space. But when you go to print, it turns out kind of a nice dark gray. So we'll get to those shades of gray a little bit later, but that's how I would change the color. If I wanted the wall layer, for example, to change color, I would click on the little white square here, and that would bring up my index color. An important note, when you pick white, or ultimately black, when you print, you want to pick it from this top row of colors. It's index color 7, not the white that's down here, which is 255 white, because that will end up printing in white. And a line in white, when you print it on white paper, won't show up. So you want to just make sure that you're using the actual white that's up here. OK, as we go forward here, the next thing that we have is line type. And so this is where we would, if we wanted to, switch to a dashed line, or a hidden line, or a center line, different line type. we could change our whole layer to be that kind of a line. Right now, all of the line types are set for continuous, which just means they're a solid line. Next thing coming over is called line weight. And this is where we can change the thickness of a line. And so I'm going to ask that you guys start working with line weights by layer. And this is a good strategy for defining line weights. Essentially, we'll take the wall layer, and anything that's on the wall layer, we will give it a default thickness. So right now it's set at default, but we want to change it and tell it what it's going to be. My suggestion on the back side of the sheet that you guys have right now is that walls need to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 0.4 millimeters. And so if we come down here to 0.4, that's pretty good. Anything smaller than 0.3 won't display on screen particularly well, but it will print nicely. So just be aware of that the display doesn't always show. So I'm going to set the walls at 0.4, and I'll say OK. And you can say that the walls change from being default to being 0.4. The next thing is on the doors. I'm going to change those to be 0.18. So I'll come down here, and I'll pick 0.18. That's my line weight. There that is. My windows, I'm going to set at 0.00. And so this is one of those interesting things. AutoCAD has a line weight that's 0.00, which, if you were really thinking about it, means that it's nothing. But it's the equivalent of the thinnest line that you can draw in AutoCAD. So 0.00 is what we'll set for our windows. Our fixtures for right now, I will also set to 0.00, though I may end up doing them a little bit thicker. Let's go 0.09. It can be a little thicker. We'll do 0.009. And so I've essentially assigned the window, the fixtures, the door, and the wall. The topography we'll come back to. I'll leave that as default for right now. So now I need to think about how do I get objects onto these layers, because currently everything is set on layer 0, which is the default AutoCAD layer. So I'm going to go ahead and close the Layer Properties Manager. I'll close it like that. And now I want to switch and have some of these, especially the walls, on the walls layer. There's a couple ways of dealing with that. The easiest strategy is to select objects that are the wall. And when you select those objects, come up to the Layers little ribbon here. Click on the drop-down menu where Layer 0 is currently listed, and scroll down to Wall. And these will then be on the wall layer. To make it a little bit easier to see that we've converted it, I'm going to go back into Layer Properties. I'm going to take the wall layer, and I'm going to change the color of the wall layer to an actual color. And this will allow us to confirm that, oh yes, that did get changed. And so now it's just a matter of going through and selecting all the rest of the walls that are in my drawing. And it's a little bit annoying to have to go through and do this. And so ultimately, when you're working in AutoCAD, frequently you'll be assigning layers as you work, as opposed to drawing everything on layer 0. Remember the difference between selecting from right to left, anything your object touches or your selection touches, versus left to right, which is things that are contained within your selection group. So once again, select left to right, everything just contained within, right to left, everything that it touches. It'll help you in your selections. And as you get used to working in AutoCAD, you'll find that this becomes really natural, where you end up selecting things one way versus the other intuitively. So bear with me, I'm almost all the way around here. If you accidentally select something that you didn't intend to select, say I selected that, you can hold down the Shift key to deselect. That is different. Those of you that are in my Rhino class, that's different than Rhino. In Rhino, you hold down the Control key. It's a difference between the two. And almost there. Perfect. I've selected all the walls. And once I have all those walls selected, I'll come up to my layers here from the drop down, I'll switch to wall, and we can see them all change to red, which is the easy way of saying, yes, I did end up selecting them all. That's good. That's a good sign. At this point, I'll come up to my layers, and I'll turn off or freeze the wall layer. And when I do that, I'm left with only the windows, which makes it a lot easier to do the selections. So I'll take the doors, for example, first. There's a door, there's a door, there's a door. These are sliding doors, so we'll select those. All right, these are closet doors, there and there. And I'll switch all of those to be on the doors layer. There they are. Now I can turn off the doors layer. Now I'm down to windows, so I'll select everything that is window. And I'll use my drop down to switch those onto the windows layer, which I can then again freeze, have them go away. Everything that's left in all likelihood are fixtures. Fixtures are things that are inside the building. The kitchen, for example, is fixtures, so I'll go ahead and switch to fixtures. And I can turn that off. There's a few other things that are left. I have the thresholds that are left here, and I have a few other lines. I'm going to turn everything back on and have another look at what those really are. So these two lines, this line and this line, are actually overhangs. They're above. They're something that's above. So those lines belong on their own layer, and that layer should be a dashed layer because with a line that has a dash in it, because it's above what we're seeing. And so I want to switch that. So I'll bring up my layer properties, and here I really should create another layer that's called A-overhead, if I can type. And that just means anything that's above my head. And on that overhead layer, I'm going to change the thickness to be 0.00, but I'm also going to change the line type from continuous because I want it to be a dashed line. So I'll click on continuous, and the only line type that I currently have loaded is continuous. I need to load another one. So I'll click the load button, and this brings up all of the AutoCAD line types that are here. The one that works best is hidden to. It's this one. This is just from practice. I like this one. And it'll do a nice tight dash for me. So we'll set hidden to, we'll say OK, and then I'll set my line type as hidden to, and there it is. So it's hidden to on layer 0.00. So there's one other thing about line types, though, is that when we work with line types in model space, which is what we're currently working in, the black background, the line types aren't going to show up. So I won't actually see the dashed line until later on. When I print it, it'll show up. So I'll go ahead and select this, and I'll select this, which are both those overhead pieces, and I'll switch them to be on the overhead layer. All right, sounds pretty good. These little thresholds, we'll put them on the fixtures layer. That's fine. That's fine. And I'm going to actually delete these lines because I don't need them right now. And there we go. So I'm not seeing any of the line weights. I'm not seeing any of the thicknesses of the lines. I can turn those on in AutoCAD if I want to see them. And I can do that by clicking down here in the right tray. There is a line weight button. It's not enabled by default. So if I click the 3 lines in the lower right corner, I can turn on line weight. It's one of my checkboxes. And then the line weight button shows up. It's still off until I actually click on line weight, in which case my lines will get thick. And you can see that change. Should help you guys see it on the projector a little bit anyway. And I realize now that the red, before I had the red, yeah, the red's really hard for you guys to see. I should switch colors so that that is like a cyan probably would show much better on the screen. I have to remember that. Yeah, you guys can see that a lot better. Apologize. I have to remember that you're not seeing my screen. OK, so now that I've assigned the line layers and the line types, we could do a test print to see what it looks like. So I'll go up to my print icon, my plot icon, and we're going to plot to that JPEG again. So publish to web JPEG, default resolution, that's fine. We're going to fit to paper, but I'm going to plot a window that goes around my object. There it is. Now, because we actually have thicknesses on our lines, we need a plot style table or pen assignments to be done. We're going to use the default, which is acad.ctb, so AutoCAD.ctb, as our line weights. This brings a good point. Line weights are done differently depending on what firm you work in. Now I'm assuming right now that you're at you would be working at a firm that's using AutoCAD. I forget what the current statistics are, but it's something like 60% of the architectural firms out there use AutoCAD, and then like 30% use Revit. Those two might have changed, and like 10% or maybe 5% use something else, which would include Vectorworks or whatever. So if you're in the majority of firms that use AutoCAD, typically the people in the firm learned AutoCAD a long time ago. And this is not a surprise because they're older than you. And when they learned AutoCAD a long time ago and they used to print their drawings, they didn't have plotters like we do. The plotters that we have now are giant inkjet printers, essentially. You can print anything you want out of them. When plotters first existed, they actually had a little carousel of pens in them. And the plotter would go over and pick up a specific pen that was a specific thickness, and it would draw the lines on the page, not print them like an inkjet printer. And so when that used to happen, they used to assign pen assignments. You get where this term pen assignments come from. They used to assign pens to colors. So you would make something green, and the plotter would know, oh, that's a 0.4 millimeter pen, and I'll pick up that pen to draw those lines. It's a total old school way of doing it, but that's how it used to be done. So firms, architectural firms, still believe in assigning a large number of them, still believe in assigning line weights by colors. And this is where you would, if you worked for a firm, and actually there was a great example. I helped Anthony Grand, who teaches 220, I helped him go through some of this basic AutoCAD stuff with his 220 students, and he gave them all a site plan. And the site plan, when you went to print it, was asking for his firm's pen assignment table. Essentially, what line weights should all of these be? And so it's still in practice. It's a current example of this kind of stuff existing. Anyway, for our purposes, we're not assigning line weights by color. That's something that you can learn in a firm. The other thing is firms always do it different. So you go to work for one firm, line weights look different than another firm. It's annoying. Anyway, for our purposes, we're sticking with just basic what you see is what you get, which the AutoCAD CTB, the default, is perfect. That's what we want. So that's on. As we come down here, we want to make sure we plot object line weights. That should be checked by default, which it is. If for some reason you don't see that whole pen assignments, there's a little arrow that opens it up. I think it's open by default, though. So anyway, everything's set up nice. I'll go ahead and say OK. It's going to ask me where to save it. I'm just going to save it on the desktop for right now. And then we can take a look at that floor plan that was just printed. So let me go ahead and drop it into Photoshop here. And we can take a look. OK, so we're seeing some line weights. Obviously, I didn't change the cyan color back to black, so I'm going to need to do that before I do the next round. A couple things of note. One, the contour line is still going through my whole building. We need to rectify that. So we'll come back to my AutoCAD. I'll go back into my layer properties. I'm going to change the wall layer to be white. Remember, it's the upper row white, not the lower row white. And I'll say OK. Now those are correct. I'm going to turn line weights on for the drawing. And from here, I could go and print it and go, I wanted to get rid of that contour. Let me use a trim with all. And we will get rid of that part. Get rid of that part. And then I'll get rid of the line in between. All right, perfect. Now we can go back and print. The good news is I already set up the printer, so I can come up here under Page Setup and say Previous Plot, and it will take all the settings from the last print, and I can just repeat it. So go ahead and say OK, and I'll put this again on the desktop. We'll say this is -2. And now I can have a look at that one. So let me get Photoshop up here. And there we go. And so now when you're looking at it, you can get a pretty good sense for, OK, at least some of the line weights are starting to stand out a little bit. And that's a good sign. So as we keep going, we're going to talk about making this even more developed. And I'll start by the idea that we can bring in something called a block that represents things like furniture. And this is a way to really develop your floor plan. There are some blocks that are built in to AutoCAD. I don't particularly like those. Many of the blocks require you to have an AutoCAD account and sign in, and on the school computers it's rather annoying. So instead of that, I'm going to work with a website that I think is great that's called First in Architecture. And so here we are in part 2. If you click on the First in Architecture link, it's a website that has a great collection of AutoCAD blocks for your use. You can see, for example, here's a bunch of kitchen blocks. If we go into, there's the Cad Blocks. You can hit a variety of different pieces. Some of these are pay, some of them are free. I'm not asking you to pay for anything today. But for example, if I wanted to work with sofas and couches or chairs, I can end up going to this one. And there's a bunch of sofas and couches and whatever. As I come down here, there's lots of advertising, but there'll be a blue button in the center that says Download Now. There's 2 units. One is metric and one is imperial. We're going to download the imperial because we're working in feet and inches. And so I'll go ahead and download that one. It downloads as a zip file, so I'm going to need to show it and then ultimately extract it. So I'll click on Extract All. And I would suggest putting this into your flash drive or your OneDrive. I actually have in my flash drive, I have a resources folder. Inside of that, I have an AutoCAD folder. Inside of that, I have a blocks folder. And this is where I put a lot of my block files. And so I'll go ahead and put it right in here and extract. And I've done this one before, so it's asking me to replace it. So we can go ahead and replace it. And there it is. And when I extract it, it's going to be this one, this FIA Cad Blocks Furniture 08 Imperial. It's the one that I just extracted and put in my blocks folder. The advantage of a block is that we don't actually have to draw the couch. We don't actually have to draw the toilet. We don't actually have to draw the sink or the stove or the refrigerator. We can just load it into our drawing and use it. So these blocks belong on the fixtures layer because the fixtures, you could do furniture. I tend to lump all of my fixtures together, and fixtures typically refer to things that are actually attached to walls, plumbing fixtures, toilets, that kind of thing. Furniture could go on its own layer. I put it on the same layer as fixtures. I'm going to make that the current layer, so I'll click on Fixtures as my layer with nothing selected. And then we've been working under the Home ribbon thus far. I'm going to switch over to the Insert ribbon, which is one over from the Home ribbon. And when I do that, there's a button for Insert. It's the first button right here. I'm going to click on that Insert button, and it's going to ask me what do I want to bring in. I'll go ahead and click on the Browse button, and this is where I will go and find those AutoCAD blocks that I downloaded. So they're in my resources folder into AutoCAD, and this is the furniture set. So right there. And so I'll select it, and I'll say Open. And it's loaded in right there. It's going to ask me a few things. One, do I want to specify where it's inserted? I could do that. Those are in absolute coordinates. Do I want to scale the object? In this case, no, I don't. So I've kept that unchecked, and everything's at 1. So it's just the default scale. Do I want to rotate any of the objects? Nope, I don't want to do any of that. So once I have all of that put together, I'll go ahead and say OK. And there is a giant table of furniture. So I have 2 options at this point. I could explode this giant table and then start to use the individual pieces, or the way AutoCAD works, believe it or not, I can actually just delete this big block, and when I go back up to the Insert menu and I click on it, all of the individual furniture pieces that were in that block will be listed here for me to pick from, which is a lot easier. So what I can do is I can say, you know what, I think this sofa arrangement would look nice in my building. I'll click on it, and then I load up the sofa arrangement, and I can drop it into my building. So similar strategy, if I went to the Insert menu, if what is there is not listed, you can click on More Options, and it will let you go find more blocks. I'll click on Browse, and somewhere in here I have beds. I'll use my bed here. And I'll go ahead and say OK. And I can drop my bed into that scene as well. So that's a block that I created and use over and over again. Once I have that one, I can move it and drop it in there. I could also copy it. I had some other beds, so I could go back to Insert, scroll all the way to the very bottom, More Options, and let me browse here. There was a twin bed, for example. I could load that one. There's a twin bed. Actually, you know what? I want the twin bed over here. And we'll put this bed over here. And we can copy it and put a second twin bed in there. Maybe move those a little bit. And so essentially, I'm able to put in those symbols that represent things. Sometimes, First in Architecture doesn't have exactly what you're looking for. Frequently, manufacturers themselves will have things that you're looking for. So for example, if I wanted a toilet, I could go to Kohler.com, for example. If you prefer Toto toilets, you could go to Toto.com. Anyway, I could go into bathroom, and I could say, you know, I'm interested in a toilet, and pick whatever type of toilet I wanted. I'm not going to pick a wall-hung toilet. Sure. And I could say, oh, you know what? I really like this one. And I'm not judging the toilet. I'm picking this at random. And as I come down here, under Specifications, they have listed CAD files. 2D CAD files, Plan, DWG. I can download that. Let me show it in my folder. There it is. I'll copy it. I'll go into my folders, into my resources, AutoCAD, Blocks. I'll put it in Bathroom to keep it organized. You see I have a folder for Kohler already. This is another Kohler toilet. We'll just paste it right there. And I don't remember what the name of that Kohler toilet was. And I could go over into AutoCAD. I could go into my Insert menu, scroll all the way to the bottom, click on More Options, Browse, and go find that Kohler toilet. That was under Bathroom. And there it was. And I can say Open and OK. And there's my Kohler toilet. So for things like toilets or sinks or whatever, it can be very beneficial to go to a manufacturer's website and find these objects. This saves a lot of drawing. You don't actually have to draw a toilet anymore. You can just drop your particular chosen toilet into place. And so I can rotate this one. There it is. And I can move it down to the wall. I haven't exactly laid out my bathroom just yet. I don't know what walls things would be on. Actually, this would probably be, I don't know where that would be in that bathroom. Anyway, so you can bring those kinds of things in. Looks like I have a few lines that are missing, so I should probably fix those lines as well. Let me go back to Home, and I'm going to go ahead and draw that edge of the cabinet there. And I'll draw this edge of the cabinet there. I already drew in a sink. I have not drawn in a shower, so there's still other things to do. I probably need some kind of a dining table in here, etc. But you guys don't have to watch me keep inserting blocks. You get the idea for how to insert the blocks, etc. If you're struggling to find a block that you're particularly interested in, you can also just use Google to search for Cad block of whatever it is, Cad block bed or that sort of thing. So now I have this. I have all of my little furniture. We can do another test print to see how it looks. So once again, I'll go back to Previous Plot. I'll say OK. This is number 3. And we could go back. And there it is with the furniture in it. So you can see it's starting to develop into a floor plan, a nice looking floor plan. So let me go back to my AutoCAD again. And now the next thing is maybe I really would like to have the walls filled in so that they read a little bit more solid. This particular thing can be done in Illustrator after the fact, or we could do it in AutoCAD. So it's kind of whichever one you're more comfortable in long term. But I want you to at least learn the skill. To do that, we're going to use something called a hatch. And a hatch is essentially some kind of a pattern that fills in a closed region. And so in our home ribbon, in the first draw section, the lower right corner is the hatch button. And if you click on hatch, and then we look at our command line, it says to pick internal point. So in this case, I'm going to pick inside the wall, like that. My pattern is set right now as this diagonal line. But if I were to click inside the wall, I would have to zoom in an awful long way before I would see that pattern because it's so dense. Truth is, I would rather have the inside of my wall filled solid anyway, so I'm going to choose solid as my fill type for right now. And then I would go through and I would fill the rest of these little pieces of my wall. And it's being really slow and choppy, so I apologize for that. All right, I'm going to go ahead and finish that and come back and do some more hatches as a separate group of hatches. It was taking too long to do the actual fills. All right, that looks pretty good. Let's come down here. And we'll do this again. There's another one. Do this. And there's all of my hatches. Now, it would probably be good to have a little bit more control over my hatches. So I would go up into my layers, my layer properties, and I would create another layer. And on this one, I would say A-fill or A-hatch, either way, just so that I could tell that this was a hatch. And I would select all of those hatches that I just created. There. And there. There. All right, and then we'll move them onto the hatch. So I have to go back to the home ribbon and switch from fixtures onto hatch. And that gives me more control over the hatches. I could, for example, do a test print and see what this one looks like. So I'll go back up to print, previous plot. I'm not going to ask you today to keep doing all of these plots along the way. I'm doing this for illustration purposes so that you can see the evolution of this plan as I go through. So there's my next one. We'll open that one up in Photoshop here. And you can see that filling in those walls really makes the walls stand out. That's a big difference from this to that. And so in this scenario, maybe the walls become too dark. This would read great at a small scale from far away. But if you were up close to it, something like this reads a little bit better. So you have to think about the scale that somebody's going to be looking at your particular drawing. Frequently in magazines, like if you look at an architectural magazine, they'll show floor plans like this where the walls are actually filled in completely. Okay, so now that that is done, maybe it was a little too much, And in that scenario, I'll go back to my AutoCAD, and I'll take the layer properties, and I'm going to go to that hatch layer. And instead of being in white this time, I'll switch it to be one of the grays. So maybe I'll do like the third gray down here, which is, I think it's 250. There's 251, 252, somewhere in there. 251, 252 would be fine. And I'll say OK. And at this point, all of my fills become kind of a lightish gray. And so I could once again go to print, previous plot. This was number 5. And so in this scenario, the walls are filled, but they're not as strong as the solid black walls. So you can see how there's variance to what you're trying to do. And so you can play around with those values as well. So the next thing that sometimes people want to do is they want to add a little bit more context to the floors. So they might want to add some flooring. We can do the same thing with our hatch tools to create flooring on the inside of these spaces. I will point out that every once in a while you have trouble with one of the blocks, and it's dependent on who did the hatch and the block as to whether who did the block as to whether it hatches nicely or not. I believe this one does hatch nicely, so I'm going to give that one a shot. So when I go back up and I click on the hatch command, this time I want to fill in inside of this shape. But I don't want to fill it in solid. So I'm going to look at the other hatches that I have available. If I wanted to, say, tile the floor, I could use one of the brick patterns, or I could use one of the diagonal patterns to do a tile pattern on the floor. But I like frequently just doing a simple diagonal for the floor. It's not going to end up being a diagonal, but I put that in place. It's still, the scale is way off, so it's just the solid mass. I need to change that, and I'll do that by coming up to my options here, my properties for the scale, or for the hatch. And I can change this first one here that is currently at 1.0. That's the hatch pattern scale. And what I typically do is I start at 1, and then I jump to 10. And I'll type 10 in, see what happens. Oh, OK, well, I can kind of see those diagonals. Maybe we'll go up to 20. All right, that looks a little bit better. Let's go up to 30. OK, that feels more like what a hardwood floor would look like. I could go up, say, 40, and at some value, it's like, yeah, that feels pretty good. I don't want my hardwood floors to be diagonal. I'm not quite that trendy. So I can adjust by the angle here. I could set my hardwood floors at 90. Oops, sorry, 45. And now they're all running as vertical lines. When I'm done, I'll go ahead and hit Enter, like that. And so here's a problem. This hatch went through my couch. There's not a really convenient way of dealing with that as a problem. We can try to trim. So I could select my couch here. I could type trim, and I could attempt to trim out that particular piece. But it doesn't look like it's going to play nice for me. It's going to delete the whole thing. Oh, it's going to leave me some other pieces. So the other option would be, during our hatch, give yourself, like, say, a rug under the couch with a rectangle. It doesn't have to have a pattern on it, and then hatch around that. The other thing that I don't know if you noticed, but it filled in all of my door swings. I don't want that to happen, specifically on the outside, but I also don't want there to be a line in my door. So this is where that non-printing layer can come into play. So I could go to my line tool. I could draw a line that goes right across. Let me turn on my midpoint snap here. And I could go right across the midpoint, there to there. And I don't want that line to end up printing. So in my layer properties, I'll create a new layer. And I have always called this layer a no print. And when you are done creating that layer, the little printer icon, you want to click on it. It gets a red circle. That means it's not going to print. And also, personally, I always color my non-printing layers green. It's just habit. It's just something that I do. It doesn't mean that you have to do it, but I'm just telling you that that's just something I do. And so I'll have my no print layer set as green. And I can take that line and put it on the no print layer. Now it's not going to print out. Furthermore, I could take a line there. I could take a line there. And I could take a line there. And I could put all of these on the no print layer. Perfect. Now I can go back to that hatch command. You can type in hatch in the command line, or you can click the hatch button. And I'll pick the inside. And you see that when I do that, it works around my rug. And it also works just in this hallway. Go ahead and press enter to finish. And then maybe I'll go back to my hatch and I'll change my hatch to something else. So maybe I'll do floor tiles in the bathroom. We hope it works nicely around the toilet. Maybe I won't do floor tiles in the bathroom. Oh, of course, now it works. So it did work in terms of a pattern. Not all of these are required by any means. I could go back and I could hatch and I could say, you know what, I want kind of a brick pattern outside in this outside courtyard. Maybe it's this one. If you wanted pavers, for example, you can actually go to a paver manufacturer and download their hatch patterns and put those in. So you can get rather specific. This one's not turning out particularly well for me just yet because the scale's off. So in this case, I'm going to put the scale back to 1, maybe a little bit bigger, 1.5. That looks pretty good. I don't like my 45, so let's change that back to 0. And there we go. That's now the pattern for the outside. So these are certainly options. The other thing that I've found on these is that typically these hatch patterns should be much lighter so that they don't overpower your drawing. If I were to print this right now, and this is a good illustration, you go to print, previous plot, and say OK. Number 6. Versus taking these two hatch patterns and changing them. And this time I'm not going to do it by layer because they're just on the fixtures layer. I'll come over to my properties and change them individually. I'm going to make them, let me go to more colors. I'm going to make them real light. We'll do like 253 or something like that. And when I go to print those where they're light, they'll make much less of an impact. There'll just be some extra information. So this is 6 versus 7. I'll open both of those in just a second. So let me open up oh, it's on the desktop, sorry. 6. So there it is where the hatch patterns are black. So they're really showing up. And you can see here that those lines didn't show up in my doorways because they were on that non-printing layer. They're not there. That was a little strong. So the option would be this one, which was number 7, where those are much fainter. They're there, we get a sense of the texture, but they're not overpowering. If you struggle with the hatches and they're not turning out the way you want them to, it's okay to leave them off. It's not something that's required. It's something that's optional that you can do that can enhance your drawing. So just be aware that it's not required. It's just something that you can do to enhance your drawing. So the purpose today is to fine-tune your floor plan. You'll have time to continue working on your floor plan itself. If you're not quite fully developed yet, you can have time to work on that. Then I'd like you to try to bring in some blocks, set up your line weights and your layers. Ultimately, try to do some hatching, see how that works for you. If it doesn't work, remember you can leave that part off as it is optional. And then ultimately, we'll get to the point where you have your floor plan ready for next class. Next class, we're going to move on into creating the building elevations. So by next class, by next Monday, I strongly suggest you have the floor plan done so that we can then move on to the building elevations. Okay, sound good? Are there any questions for where we're going? No? All right, I'll let you guys start work.